Hello my friends, Chris here with ISK Recording. In this video, I am going to simplify the mastering process. This video is aimed at beginners that want to start getting into mastering their own music. Now first off, I'm going to explain a little bit about what mastering is, because there's a lot of confusion about this. Now the misconception here is that some people think the mastering process is supposed to make the song sound better. That's something that can happen in the mastering process, but that's not the main goal. Let me explain why. A mastering engineer only has certain tools available. Now, if they're able to hear a problem in the mix, and if they have a tool that can fix that problem, then yes, they'll be able to make the mix sound better. But ideally, it's the mix engineer's job to make the mix sound better. The mastering engineer's job is to make the mix sound even, to make it sound consistent, listening to it on any medium, whether it's your iPhone, your car stereo, or earbuds. It has to sound good on all those devices. And the volume levels need to be optimized, so there's different requirements now for streaming services. And it's the mastering engineer's job to get your song at a final volume level that competes with other songs on these playback mediums such as Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. And I'll give you a hint, small spoiler alert, I'll get into this more later, but making your song as loud as possible in the mastering process does not make it louder in the streaming services. It'll actually make it quieter. So I'm going to explain this more later, but for now we're going to jump into the DAW. I use Logic Pro and I've got a session loaded up where I'm going to show you a simplified workflow for mastering that can be very powerful. Now, one of the most important things with mastering is your monitoring. You have to be able to hear the song very clearly. And this is one of the things that separates a high-class mastering studio is they'll have very high-end speakers and an acoustically treated room. But you as a beginner, you probably don't have these things. So what can you do to try and hear the song as good as possible? You need to make up for it by having multiple sets of speakers and headphones that you listen back on. You see, there is no such thing as a perfect speaker system. It doesn't exist. A speaker can only be subtractive in quality. It can't add qualities. Kind of like looking through the windshield of a car. The windshield isn't going to make things clearer on the other side. The goal of the windshield is to be as clear as possible and offer the least amount of deterioration. So the best you could possibly have is perfectly clear, but no windshield in the world is perfectly clear. That's impossible. So same with speakers. No speaker in the world is perfect. Every single speaker system has certain things that it doesn't do very well. For instance, your speakers might not have very much bass. It's important to know what the deficiencies are so that you can compensate for it. Now, how do you compensate for it? Now, there's a misconception here that if you know your speakers don't have much bass, you can just mix so that your mixes don't have much bass. That does not work because you're guessing, you're flying blind, you're making adjustments blindly. If your speakers don't have good bass, you need another pair of speakers that do have good bass. So even if you know what the deficiencies are of your speakers, you cannot compensate for it by adjusting. You have to hear whatever that deficiency is through something else. Just like your windshield. If there's a spot you can't see through on that windshield, you can't compensate for it by guessing what's on the other side. You just can't. You have to know what's there. So the same with a speaker system. You have to know what's there. So get another speaker system that reveals whatever the deficiencies are of your other speaker system. So you might want to have several speaker systems. And what I recommend is earbuds and headphones. Honestly, like for budget mastering, get several pairs. A lot of people are willing to spend a lot of money on a single pair of headphones that are really good all around. They're still not going to be perfect because no speaker system is perfect. But rather than do that, you'd be better off to buy several pairs for $100 or $200 each that have different strengths and different weaknesses. For instance, one might be weak in the bass, so you get another pair of headphones that are strong in the bass. One might be weak in the mids, you get another pair that are strong in the mids. One might be weak in the treble. You know what to do. So don't try to master using just one listen back device or speakers. You need to hear the song basically through different perspectives. There's my session right there. Let's jump into it. All right, so here I've got a song loaded and I've got a basic mastering template loaded up here. And by the way, I've got this mastering template available for download, so you can download this Logic session and use it. But I've actually got another video specifically about this template and demonstrating how to use this template, whereas this video is more about just basic mastering. All right, so a quick overview of my workflow here. So I've got 3 tracks here set up. I've got one track that's a reference, and this is a song that is not the song that I am mastering. It's just another song that has a similar style and a similar type of sound that I'm going for. I want to get the kick sounding the same. I want the same amount of bass. I want the same amount of treble and basically the same overall volume levels. So this is what I'm using as a reference so that the adjustments I make aren't so much based on whatever mood I'm in that day. I've got something standardized so that I can maintain consistency. So the next track down here, this is just the original unmastered version of the song. I've got it loaded up here just to keep it here and handy for reference. I've also got the volume of it a little bit higher because I want this to be the same volume level as the one that I'm working on. So this next track here is the one that I'm working on. So I'm using plugins within the track to adjust how it sounds. I want to adjust mostly the EQ settings, the volume settings, and the dynamics such as compression and limiting. So let's give this track a quick listen here.
It's been one of those days. Everything is too much to take.
Okay, so we are going to dive into my mastering template here and which types of effects that I use to achieve the sound and why I use them. So the first one that I have here is an EQ. It's a linear phase EQ, but any EQ will do. And there's nothing really special about this. This is the first thing in the chain. I've got a low cut filter here at like 30, 35 hertz or so, because for most songs, you don't really want any frequencies below that. It just muddies things up. They're not really beneficial. So we want to get rid of all of that. And then we want to take a listen to the song and see what we like and what we don't like. So I'm just going to play the song here and I'm going to experiment with a couple of different frequency bands and just see how I like it.
Everything is too much to take. I feel like I'm gonna break. In pieces I fall away. Now I gotta hold on tight and hope you get me out alive one day. I feel so overwhelmed.
You know what? I'm going to turn the rest of these plugins off because I want to do this in a sequential kind of an order. But just as I was doing this, I noticed the lower mids sounded nice when they were boosted. The original track just seems really weak in that area. So I'm going to toggle this on and off.
By all of these things I do to keep me from thinking of you, I can't.
Yeah, I definitely like what those lower mids are doing there. I normally wouldn't do such a drastic EQ boost on mastering, but I mean, you do what you got to do. So I thought that sounded good, so I'm going to do it.
I can't go on, not without you. It's been one of those days when I didn't.
Yeah, I kind of like that right about there. So I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to experiment with a couple other frequencies. It's quite common that I'll add high frequencies. There's no rules here. There's nothing that like you should do this all the time because every song is different and you don't know what it's going to need. So you got to use your ears to figure it out. All right, I like that. I'm going to toggle this EQ on and off and just see if I like what it's doing. Okay, I'm going to bring the volume of this EQ down. So this EQ has a master volume here. Because as I do my A-B comparisons, I don't want one to be louder than the other because our ears will just naturally gravitate towards liking the one that is louder. It'll just sound better. So you want to make sure you're not tricking yourself. So I'm bringing this master volume down a bit. There we go.
It's been one of those days. Everything is too much to take. I feel like I'm gonna break in pieces.
Yeah, okay, so I'm still liking what this does. Having reduced the volume, it gives me a more neutral perspective that it's not, one isn't louder than the other, but I can hear the difference in just the EQ curve, and this one definitely sounds fuller. I like what happened here. So moving on to the next plugin that I have in the chain, and it's a linear phase EQ, an EQ again. It's the same EQ. So you might be wondering like, what, Chris, why do you got 2 EQs in a row? Actually, I've got 3 EQs in a row. Look at this. 3 EQs in a row. So why on earth am I doing that? There actually is a good reason for it, because the software that I'm using here is Logic Pro, and it has an EQ called the linear phase EQ. It's also got an EQ called just the normal channel EQ. Right here, see, you got a couple different EQs. So there's the channel EQ and the linear phase EQ, but the channel EQ is very similar, and it also has a similar feature here that I'm after. See here where it says processing stereo? I'm going to processing mid only. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to get rid of this plugin, no plugin. So this middle EQ that I have here, this is processing the mid only. So we've got a few different options. So we can have the EQ process the left only, it can process the right only, the mid only, or the sides only. Now this is a huge advantage for the mastering process, being able to separate the mids and sides and process them differently. So what is this? What is this mids and sides thing that I'm talking about? So within your song, there's what's called stereo imaging. You can place things to one side, to another side, or straight down the middle. So the mid-side processing analyzes what sounds are in the middle, but not in the sides. For instance, a lead vocal is usually straight down the middle, which means exactly the same signal is coming out of each speaker. So it sounds like it's in the middle. But quite often people will record, let's say, guitars, and they'll record 2 takes of it, and one take is hard panned to one side, the other take is hard panned to the other side. And they'll be the same volume. So when you listen, it still feels symmetrical, because you've got the same volume of sound coming out of each speaker, but it's not the exact same signal coming out of each speaker. So in that case, those guitars are 100% to the sides, 0% in the middle. So mid-side processing gives you access to the sound stage that's right in the middle, separately from the sound stage that is off to the sides. So this EQ here that I have instantiated, it is only processing the signal that is right down the middle. You know what? I'm going to jump ahead of myself here a little bit and go to this next plugin, because this actually explains mid-side processing a little bit better with this process. This is a free plugin by Voxengo, and it's called MSED. You can go to Voxengo's website and download it for free. Link is in the description. Let's ignore all this EQ stuff here for now. Let's just listen to this song here. Okay, so now we can listen to, here's what the mid channel sounds like by itself. Oh, so I'll mute the sides so that we can hear just the mid. So first off, what we're going to hear is going to be in mono. Normally, when you take a stereo signal and make it mono, all the information from the side channels just gets amalgamated into one center channel. But that's not what this is doing. This is muting the side channels. So the only thing you hear is the mid channel.
Everything is too much to take. I feel like I'm gonna break. In pieces I fall away.
All right, now I'm going to mute the mid channel. So all we can hear now are the side channels. So what we mostly hear there's a lot of reverb, there's some instrumentation. Usually I have more instrumentation on the side channels in my mixes. This one just is a bit of a little less than average. And within this plugin, I can also adjust the gain of just the mid frequencies and the gain of just the side frequencies. So as we listen to that, like I said, this song doesn't have quite as much stereo width as most of the songs that I do. So I can increase the stereo width by increasing the side gain. Let's take a listen to how it sounds when I do that.
All these things I do to keep me from thinking of you. I can't thinking of you. I can't. So you can hear that electric guitar come in pretty strong there on the side channels. And even by just turning the volume of the side channel up, I'm turning the volume of that guitar part up. And it actually sounds a little bit overbearing there with, I'm going to turn the mid channel back on. Yeah, like that guitar is way too loud. I can't have that. So I've got to bring that volume. I mean, that's boosted by 12 decibels. So I'm going to bring that volume back to 0.
And again, that's a free plugin. Download it, use it. That's what it's there for. All right, getting back to my EQs here. So this first EQ that I have, it only EQs the mid channel.
Not without you. It's been one of those days when I didn't know what to say, and I just had to walk away. Don't have the strength today, so now I'll try and hold on tight and pray I'll make it to the morning light.
So this little boost here in the bass frequencies, that's isolating the bass guitar and the kick drum. They're together. But because this is mid only and there's no side processing on the bass guitar and kick, both of those are panned dead center, this is affecting them 100%. And I kind of liked a little bit of a bass boost. I thought that sounded good. And then also when I boosted the treble, this wasn't boosting the treble on the side channels. And in the higher frequencies, I tend to use more stereo imaging. So there's not going to be as many things dead center. So what is dead center is still the lead vocal. So as I boost the treble here, I'm actually boosting the treble of the lead vocal a little bit more than a lot of the other instruments. And I liked what that boost did. But just because I like it doesn't mean it really is better, because it's louder too. So let's decrease the volume here so that it's about... so that I'm not tricking myself. Now let's toggle this EQ on and off.
It's been one of those days when I didn't know what to say, and I just had to walk away.
See, I don't like these EQ adjustments as much anymore. I don't hate them, but this treble, it's not as necessary anymore. It was starting to get a little bit sibilant. So I'm bringing that treble down. I'm going to bring my bass adjustment down. And it was also starting to sound a little bit thin here in the mids. All right, but I'm going to keep that as just a really slight adjustment because I kind of liked what it did. So there we go. Let's toggle that on and off.
Don't have the strength today, so now I'll try and hold on tight and pray I'll make it to the morning.
Yeah, I think I'm liking that. All right, so that's enough of my mid EQ. Now I'm going to turn on my EQ. This affects only the sides. As part of my default template, I've got a low cut filter on here because I don't want any stereo imaging on these lower frequencies here. So I just cut them right out completely. Like I said, all I've got down there is the bass guitar and the kick drum. There shouldn't be anything else going on down there with stereo imaging. Let's give this a listen.
Keep me from thinking of you. I can't stop. I can't go on, not without you. It's been one of those days when I didn't know what to say, and I just had to walk away. Don't have the
All right, there wasn't anything there that I liked or disliked or thought needed more of or less of.
strength today, so now I'll try and hold on tight and pray I'll make it to the morning light.
I'm not finding anything here on the side frequencies that need to be adjusted. I mean, I've already boosted the treble here on this first EQ just a little bit. And then again, I boosted the treble on my mid-channel EQ just a little bit. But yeah, I wasn't finding anything here on the side channels that it needed. So that's my EQs. The first one is a global EQ. So this affects both the mid-channel and the side channels evenly. The second one is a mid-channel EQ, and the third one is a side-channel EQ. Now, I'm using Logic, and it comes with an EQ that offers mid-side processing. If you're using a DAW that doesn't have an EQ with mid-side processing, then I would recommend you get a third-party EQ that offers mid-side processing. This is a somewhat advanced feature, and I wasn't able to find any free plugins that offer this. But what I did find was a really nice EQ from Tokyo Dawn Labs. I've never actually used this specific EQ. I've used the free version of this EQ, but the free version doesn't have mid-side processing. And you know what? I really like the free version. So I'm sure I'm going to like the paid version. Let's take a look here. So here's tokyodawn.net. You go to audio plugins. And here's the one down here, TDR VOS Slick EQ. Boom. This EQ costs 30 euros. That's not crazy expensive. And it's got a lot of advanced features that are really good. The specific feature that we are after here is right here. It says stereo, mono, left, right, and some difference. Now, some difference is mid-side processing options. Dual mono mode, great. Now, another thing that this EQ has that I really like, and maybe I should be using this EQ instead, but it's got, where is it here? Right here. It says highly effective loudness compensated auto gain control. So you remember when I was adjusting the master volume of the EQ so that I could A/B with and without my EQ adjustments and one wouldn't be louder than the other? It was compensated. So this has the ability to automatically match overall loudness. That is super convenient. All right, back to our mastering here. So the next plugin that I've got in the chain is MSED. Already talked about this, and I'm not going to go into this too much more. But there wasn't really any adjustments here that I wanted to make.
Feel so overwhelmed by all of these things I do to keep me from thinking of you.
I don't think it needs to change the balance between the side channel and mid channel, so I'm just going to leave this alone. But I still want to show you that it's there and it's part of my mastering process because it's part of the tools that are available to you as an audio engineer. All right, next I've got the compressor. Now, there's this big debate in the world about what you should do first, EQ or compression. Now, different experts have different opinions, but I'm pretty firmly on EQ should come first. And here's the reason why. Your EQ settings will affect what the compressor does. If you boost the bass in the EQ, then you've got more signal going into your compressor, and your compressor is going to react differently based on your EQ settings. If you put the compressor first, then your EQ will not react differently based on your compressor settings. So I want my compressor to kick in based on how it really does sound. So here's the thing with dynamics. I told you earlier I was going to explain this a little bit more. Now I'm explaining it a little bit more. In the mastering process, you want to be as subtle as possible in your dynamic control. Now, what your compressor does, other than just taming the loudness, is it glues the track together. It just like amalgamates the track and makes everything sound smooth and like it belongs with each other. Well, the compressor plays a major role in that. Now, the more you compress the dynamics, the louder you can make the song. And back in the days where CDs were the most popular medium of listening to music, this was important because everybody wanted their song to be as loud as possible. Nowadays, however, CDs are pretty much out the window. Everybody listens on streaming services. And what these streaming services do is when you upload your song on their platform, they analyze the overall loudness levels and they do their own normalization because on these streaming services, they want all of their songs to be the same average volume. Remember back in the day, you would make your own mixed CD and then there'd be like volume discrepancies. Some of the songs would be loud, some of the songs would be less quiet. Like that's over with. That doesn't happen anymore. All the songs are the same volume on these streaming services. And that's why they do their own volume normalization. So if you go and compress the snot out of a song, and make it super loud so that it'll be really loud on a CD, when you go upload that onto a streaming service, they're just going to reduce the volume down to their average levels. And it might actually be lower volume. And here's why. Take a look at this. See this song here? You can see just looking at the waveform that it gets louder throughout the song. Like there's a build up here and then, verse 2, it's quiet again, but not as quiet as the first verse. And then it builds up into this instrumental, and then the final chorus is like the peak. Now, if you were to take an average level of this whole song, it might be like, I don't know, maybe something like whatever the volume level of this area here is. Now, if you were to squish the dynamic range, then the whole song would basically just be this volume level. But by leaving as much dynamic range as possible, when you upload it onto the streaming platform, what you did is you retained a larger range of the louds are going to be louder and the quiets are going to be quieter. So preserving the dynamic range will, in the end, give you more volume on the parts that are important, the loud parts of the song. And another thing with the compressor is, on mastering, I like to use a low ratio. I've got my ratio here set to 1.5. That's about my preference for mastering, so it's really gentle. I've got my threshold here set a little bit low so that the compressor kicks in throughout most of the dynamic range, but it's not kicking in hard. It's only doing a little bit. Now, moving on within my mastering template here, the next plugin that I have in the chain is a Multiband Compressor. Boom, let's make it bigger. So what I've done with the Multiband Compressor, and this is part of the template that I offer as a free download, but one of the things I just often like what this does to a song. I mean, there is no preset that just works on every song, but this is something that works often, I'll just say, is I boost the bass and I boost the treble, but with the Multiband Compressor, whenever they get loud in those two ranges, it ducks down, it compresses. So a multiband compressor is basically a compressor, but it analyzes specific frequency ranges and compresses them independently of each other. So I've got the bass boosted, but whenever the kick hits in, that's louder volume, so it compresses it a little bit so that the average is maybe roughly the same or a little bit more, but it reduces the dynamic range of that frequency, but it also makes that frequency a little bit more prominent. So by boosting the bass and treble a little bit, what I find is it just gives the mix a little bit more life. Let's take a listen to this with and without. Yeah, I don't know if you were able to hear what it was doing. It was pretty subtle, but the little bit that it is doing, I feel like it just brings it to life. It adds a little bit more energy. And the final plugin that actually changes the sound here is the limiter. Let's turn that on. Here's our limiter in Logic. Let's make it nice and big. There we go. So the limiter is your most prominent plugin that's going to determine the final volume of the song. You really want to get the settings right on this one. And I don't use my ear, because what using my ear is going to do is it's just going to make me favor the louder settings. I use my eyes and then I adjust it so that there's just a minimal amount of gain reduction. I want, like on the occasional peak, I want 1 or 2 decibels of gain reduction maximum. So there, it bounced and hit 3 there, a tiny little bit. And like I said, on the occasional peak, I want 1 to 2 decibels of gain reduction. That was averaging 1 or 2 decibels of gain reduction. That was too much. Yeah, so if you notice, I went to the loudest part of the song, and I want it kicking in a little bit to get the extreme peaks, but nothing more than that. I want minimal settings on this limiter. Because like I said, because a limiter is basically just going to boost the volume of the whole song, but we don't need to worry about the volume of the whole song. My goal here is to preserve the dynamic range. And the very last plugin that I've got in my chain here is the Multimeter. This one doesn't actually affect the sound. This is just for metering so that you can see how loud it measures. Let's just give this a go. Yeah, so it's got your frequency spectrum, so you can analyze that, see if there's like certain frequencies that there's not much of, or that there's too much of, or too little of. Maybe you missed something with your ear. So I'm noticing from looking at this that there's not very much at about 100 hertz, this range right here. Yeah, that seems pretty consistent there. So I'm going to go back to my EQ. See, I already boosted that frequency range, but I'm going to boost it a little bit more. I'm going to bring this down a little bit and boost it more. Let's take a listen to how that sounds. Okay, I'm going to put this back to where it was. It was right about there. And I'm going to instantiate another EQ here to try and get that little boost there that I wanted. So that was at about 100 hertz, so we're at 141. Let's go down to 100. Let's go nice and tight, and I'm going to boost it a little bit more. And I'm going to toggle that on and off. Okay, I kind of like what it's doing. I'm going to reduce it a little bit because I had a bit of an extreme setting to try and exaggerate it while I do my A/B comparison toggling. But yeah, I kind of liked it. I'm not going to get too carried away trying to make adjustments based on what I see visually on the graph. I mean, you're supposed to use your ears, but sometimes using your eyes can reveal something that you were unable to hear with your ears, or something that you just weren't able to find. So yeah, I kind of like what that little EQ adjustment did. But the most important thing about using this, this metering plugin is the LUFS right here. That is a number that matters. So this is basically telling you your overall loudness. Yeah, so we're at 8.7 there. That's all right, like, because this is the loudest part of the song, so I'm okay with negative 8.7, so let's just call it -9. So you want to strive for an average of around -10, and I think I've got that here.
The life I once led is all but dead to...
Yeah, so I'm at like -14 here in the beginning of the song. Yeah, so about -10 there during that chorus. Like, we're looking good here. Now, if, let's just say it's at like around -6 or so, that means you're too loud. You're going to want to reduce the amount of compression on it and reduce the overall volume. And if you're at like, you know, -14, -16, then you can get away with adding a little bit more compression and increasing the overall volume to get a little bit more volume out of it. But ultimately, it doesn't matter that much anymore, like I explained, because the streaming services automatically normalize the volume of everything anyway. So, like I said earlier, I think the most important thing is to retain the dynamic range.
When nothing will go my way, I need you here with me, I'd say. Everything will be okay. It's been one of those days when I couldn't bear the weight. The pain of life was too great. Yeah, I can't hang on anymore. I need
So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, smack that like button there for me. I would really appreciate that. And also, I want to let you know that I've got an entire audio engineering course that I'm putting here on YouTube. It's completely free of charge, and it's structured to teach you everything you need to know to run your own studio from beginning to end and have success and great sounding recordings. So if you want the free course, just hit subscribe to this channel because I've got tons more videos to upload. So thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.